Hello and welcome to another INSOL Europe COVID coffee break. My name is Carmel King. I'm a director at Grant Thornton in London and the co-chair of INSOL Europe's Anti-Fraud Forum. The Anti-Fraud Forum is a group of approximately 70 members which was set up in 2012. Our aim is to promote the use of insolvency processes to assist with the tracing and recovery of assets, and also to set up a forum for people who work in anti-fraud and asset recovery to get to know each other across Europe. One of the events that we'd like to plug while we're here is a conference on the 27th of October. In real life or online, it depends really on how we find ourselves, but it's going to be joint with London's Fraud Advisory Panel and R3, the UK's trade body for insolvency professionals. The theme of the conference is going to be the Counter-Fraud Practitioner's Toolkit, Preparing for a New World, which couldn't be more apt, although we came up with it pre-COVID. So please put that date in your diaries. That's the 27th of October 2020, and we look forward to seeing you there. Now I'll pass you over to my co-chair, Bart. Maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us what we'll be talking about today.
Yes, thank you very much, Carmel. My name is Bart Heynickx. I work as a lawyer with Altius Lawyers in Belgium, in Brussels, and like Carmel already mentioned, I am the second co-chair also of the INSOL Anti-Fraud Forum. So what we will be talking about today is a bit different from the COVID coffee breaks that INSOL Europe has organized so far. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on fraud in a very broad and general term and sense. So like in the past, like for example with the 2008 recession, we've seen that recessions lead to more fraud. In 2008, you had like the Madoff Ponzi scheme or the Stanford Financial Group Ponzi scheme. So some kind of similar fraud perhaps could also be expected as an outcome of the current recession. So we estimate that we'll be likely to see some more types of such kinds of fraud, let's say like intentional fraud, where fraudsters are actually setting up schemes to defraud other people. But on the other hand, of course, it is likely that we will also be seeing some fraud out of necessity or fraud out of despair. So the more unintentional fraud, where it's not done by generic fraudsters, but by people who did not have the intention to defraud anybody in the first place, but step by step, given the current situation, given the crisis, out of necessity or despair, just found themselves unintentionally stepping over that line and entering into that fraud world. So very broadly, those will be, I think, the topics that we will discuss during this coffee break. Over to you, Carmel.
Sure, I'll talk for a bit about some of the things that we've seen in the pandemic, scams for the most part. These tend to be on a smaller scale, and they're not something that firms like mine or like Bart's might always be able to tackle because they're on an individual to individual basis, and it's quite difficult to get an economy of scale so that it would be cost effective to pursue. But nevertheless, the fraudsters are sitting at home in front of their computers, the same as you and I have been for the last 12 or 16 weeks. The things that we've been seeing in terms of online scams: hot tubs, cats, kittens, dogs, Nintendo Switches, anything that people want delivered by Amazon or by pet dealers, a scammer is going to sell it to you. Unfortunately, when a scammer is involved, the item won't exist or will be counterfeit or something like that. We've seen computer repairs offered where malware is installed. A particularly insidious scam that we've seen is where the bereaved is approached and offered an inheritance. And really, that's just a scam to extract bank details from people in a very vulnerable, very difficult time. The one thing that I think we've probably all experienced, receiving texts from HMRC in the UK or government offering rebates, furlough funds, support for self-employed people. And often these are directly from scammers, again, in an effort to extract bank details, which, again, is very easy to fall for. In the UK, Action Fraud reported 2,300 coronavirus-related scams since February to a cost of 7 million. Really, that's just what was reported from people that realised that they were being scammed. The number is likely to be far, far higher than that. Bart, I understand in Belgium, you've had a PPE scam, which was on a much larger scale. And last month, here in the UK, a 20-year-old was found guilty of a COVID-related scam, which was around Bitcoin, fake Bitcoin investment. So we really are seeing people sitting at home taking advantage of other people who are sitting at home and very vulnerable. Netflix's accounts being hacked, again, another attempt to extract personal details and banking details. And finally, another one that could be larger scale, really, is where scammers are looking to take advantage of the fact that home networks might not be as strong as your networks at work in terms of firewalls and everything. So payment interception scams, where people are taking on the guise of a CEO or another decision maker instructing payments to be made away. That's something that we certainly have been seeing recently. Bart, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think also like a very big portion of fraud that we might discover also that's ongoing now and that we might discover in the future, of course, has to do with government interventions that have taken place all over EU country. Like, for example, of course, lots of governments have given exemption for taxes, for VAT, or have delayed payments. So maybe there will some companies, some people abusing of such government's intervention, but not only on the tax side, also, of course, for social security fraud. We've seen already some cases where people, of course, go on a 14-day sick leave that is almost automatically granted as a result of COVID, and then go work in black in the meantime, or people that close down their restaurants and request for government aid, government subsidies, but at the same time keep on continuing actually their business by starting to deliver food directly to people. So we'll probably see a whole lot of abuses of these government interventions, and even more so perhaps with the government subsidies. So of course, every different country has its different schemes, and in the federal state of Belgium, you even have different schemes for every federal entity. But lots of governments, of course, have implemented measures where companies almost automatically receive some kind of subsidy, some kind of intervention, some kinds of important monetary sums to assist them during these crises. And of course, we've already seen that companies go and request such sums, for example, for every establishment that they have on the territory, and not one intervention, but for every different establishment request every time the same intervention again, or where the request has been made with dummy companies or dormant companies that were not at all active during the last couple of years, but now, of course, become more active, but just to request the government intervention. So in general, there seems to be not much control over that. Also, self-employed people, of course, who work without a company, just are self-employed and are just requesting aid. There does not seem to be much control, although now maybe governments are taking a bit more steps in that regard. What do you think, Carmel?
Yeah, I think rightly, government attention is on setting up and maintaining support to people who need it in this unprecedented time. But that does mean that government attention is less on avoiding or fighting fraud that is inevitably 2 steps ahead and always looking for opportunity. So as a team, we're certainly seeing that government departments that would traditionally have focused on fighting fraud and bringing fraudsters to justice are now focused on looking at getting help out to those who need it. So what we really are seeing are various levels of fraud that have arisen. There's one-person, one-to-one fraud, which is less sophisticated and takes the form of the scams that I've described, or even someone just knocking on the door while you're home and telling you that you need a new roof. Those kind of traditional ones, shall we say. But what we're also seeing, and it's something that we could, when it comes down the line to us, really sink our teeth into, are the bigger, larger scale things, which we're not even aware of just yet. So the traditional carousel fraudsters that have been involved in VAT frauds across Europe haven't gone away. And they're taking advantage of disarray and the pandemonium, and they're really going to put their networks together and be involved in a lot larger scale fraud. So the focus at the moment on setting up aid schemes means that there's a low chance of getting caught, which means it has been a very, very good time for them to come out and seek to take opportunity or take advantage of it. But it's not all bad news. There have been things coming out of the pandemic, how we've been coping with it and how we've been dealing with it and approaching it. Tell us a little bit more about that, Bart.
Well, yes, indeed. Of course, the pandemic was really a peculiar, special situation. And of course, from the start, initially in the beginning, perhaps it was even a bit of chaos. Of course, every country, every situation is different. But now it seems that after a couple of months, of course, the dust is starting to settle, and that we get a clearer view on what is going on and what is still possible. And that, for example, also includes like court activity or measures that are possible through the courts. Now, at first, of course, that was difficult. Courts were closed or not as active. Also, public prosecutors, of course, took less initiatives, especially when it came to like companies or when it came to fighting fraud. But it seems like they have taken up the ball again, and that more action is taken in that regard. At first of all, it was also difficult to attach goods, for example, or claim for bankruptcy, or not even difficult. It was just excluded, of course, because in several different countries, also in Belgium, court measures were introduced to, legal measures by Parliament were introduced to avoid just that. So you could not attach goods of the company, you could not claim for bankruptcy. So there was a lot of protection, of course, automatically for all companies, for everybody on the market, so including fraudsters. Now that has more or less worn off, the automatic protection, so that is not available anymore. And you see that the ball is picking up again, and that we're, I think, evolving to a more normal situation again. At the same time, or parallel, of course, you saw some alternative methods that were being set up. And that came in very handy. That were very practical. Of course, the online hearings that some of you, of course, have attended, or online negotiations, or contact with clients, or with counterparts, or with much people involved through these technical methods that we have. Sometimes working very well, and sometimes also working very efficiently. Maybe that is the technology is maybe something that you can tell more about, Carmel.
Yes, in a previous COVID coffee break, Francis Coulson, who's also an Anti-Fraud Forum member, did discuss the court process over here and the embracing of digital technology, and it's something that we're certainly seeing a lot of, and it's going quite well. I've seen settlement discussions work very well virtually, which is surprising because traditionally we've always wanted to see the whites of the other party's eyes, but the use of various rooms and side rooms and several different types of technology running parallel means that a successful outcome can be gained in the same kind of time frame as we would traditionally expect. On the other side, we've seen trials which have been more complicated and have been postponed and put off for quite some time. But that's just unavoidable, I think, really, because it is more complex and it really needs the attention that it demands. Our digital forensics team has never been busier, and people are realizing that nobody really uses paper anymore. If you have a company that goes under, you don't really expect to go in and gather up all of the files, because the vast majority of the important stuff is going to be digital. All of our work is online. Something else that we're also seeing, which is a positive development, and it has been commented widely, is that the decision makers in the larger companies and organizations are not jet setting and traveling around and attending meetings. They're actually stuck at home and making decisions. People are picking up old work. We do a lot of enforcement work of arbitration awards, judgments. It ties in with our asset tracing and recovery profile. And people are essentially looking at files, and they're looking to turn assets in successful claims and judgments into cash. And that's what we're seeing come down the pipeline at the moment, whilst we're in the midst of or coming out of this pandemic. It's not yet directly COVID related things. It's much more people looking to get cash and anticipating a global economic downturn and preparing as well as they can for that. But enough about now. What about the future? What are we going to see come out of it in the fraud sphere?
Well, of course, it's always difficult to predict the future, but I think that given what we've seen the last couple of months, I think that we can expect some general kinds of files and types of work that will probably also come our way. We've already seen the last couple of weeks, for example, that big accounting scandals are already developing at present. You have the Wirecard scandal now in Germany for 2 billion. You have one in Belgium also for the FNG group, where it's like expected liability for 1.5 billion euros. So probably there will be some of these, like I mentioned when we started, there will be probably some of these scandals, accounting scandals or not, that will be coming out of this pandemic and this crisis. And also as a result, I think we will see probably more bankruptcies. Everybody is, I think, on the same line there, perhaps starting more to take up after the summer, because first you had government protection measures, now you have the summer, and probably after the summer, you will see these postponed bankruptcies where also even more zombie companies also that prior already existed will be going more into bankruptcy. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of those. And at the same time, I imagine that we will also be seeing more liability proceedings, administrative liability, for example, also as a result of the legislation to postpone issues relating to liability and wrongful trading, or the obligation to file for bankruptcy. I think that afterwards, after when the dust has settled even more, so in the future, we will be seeing more of these kinds of proceedings where creditors or shareholders are going to pursue action against administrators because afterwards they think that the actions taken at the time during the crisis were not correct or have some kinds of fraud elements to them. Or what do you estimate, Carmel?
Yeah, well, hindsight's a great thing, isn't it?
Yes.
and there's definitely going to be a lot of reliance on that. I think one of the largest things we're going to see will be the various governments turning their focus back to the fraudsters, and they're going to be assessing what really happened in the last 12 or 16 weeks in terms of support that was given out and where it may have been fraudulently claimed. We all know there's a huge amount of that going on. Even at the moment in the press, companies that are profitable are being criticised for relying on the furlough scheme, and we're seeing lots of companies undertaking to pay back whatever they've drawn down on the furlough scheme legitimately. So those that have illegitimately drawn down on the different schemes are, I would say, going to be pursued, and it will be not just an economic point but a political point for governments to make sure that that happens. And I can see that being a major source of work for fraud, insolvency and asset tracing and recovery professionals in the next few years, really, particularly the more complicated ones, which are going to involve overseas investigations and asset recovery proceedings, as well as you have the sophisticated fraudsters I referred to earlier, moving assets and moving funds overseas. The other thing that I think we'll see will be much more use of online tools. I don't know whether people are going to embrace a greener world that we saw at the beginning of COVID when all the planes stopped. It does seem that people are looking to open up the airports and book holidays as soon as they possibly can. But I do see that online tools, particularly with things like the courts or arbitration or settlement discussions, they've been shown to be effective, and I think they will be. And again, the digital practice and the tools that they have in terms of tracing assets, correspondence, and indicators of behaviour between people, that's all going to be used a huge amount in the future as people have had to do it, and now they realise just how good it is. So I think that's a quick canter through what we're seeing, what has happened and developed, and what we're anticipating for the future. I'd like to say thank you very much on behalf of the Anti-Fraud Forum, and thank you to INSOL Europe for giving us the opportunity to do this. I hope that everyone continues to stay well and stay safe.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. And of course, we hope to see you all in London.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.